Every problem in life can be boiled down to a relationship problem. How's your sex life? How's your relationships at work, with your parents, friends? This episode is sponsored by the Truism Centered Life's 30-Day Relationship Challenge. Check it out at truismcenteredlife.com. Rob's 30-Day Relationship Challenge is designed to help you feel more connected to those around you. It's a 30-day journey of self-discovery using resilience training and relationship psychology to help you feel stronger and happier with the relationships in your life. Welcome to Season 5 of the Color Success Podcast, where we talk with guests from AAPI and ethnic minority communities and have real discussions about mental health and what success looks like. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie J. Wong. Before we get into it, remember to subscribe to our mailing list for free at colorsuccesspodcast.com so you don't miss any updates. There, you will find our socials, YouTube channel, and all episodes on streaming platforms for great additional content. I am so excited to have our guest today. Dr. Jenny Wu is a Harvard-trained educator and founder CEO of Mind, Brain, Emotion. She is the creator of award-winning card games and courses to help children and adults build emotional intelligence, life skills, and social mastery. Her best-selling games, 52 Essential Conversations and Coping Skills, are used in 50-plus countries. Dr. Jenny Wu, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Stephanie.
Absolutely. I definitely have been looking forward to this conversation. We're both mothers and psychologists ingrained in us. And so emotional intelligence is just so important to foster and facilitate in our kids and also adults. How have you been able to integrate your research and your practical experience into facilitating EQ in people?
Yeah, very much like you said, right? It's sort of, we are living it day to day within ourselves, of course, also as mothers and entrepreneurs and just in our practice. So, just looking around, I definitely have to say, right, relating to this new generation of kids, youth, even adults, they've gone through so much, right?
Yes.
And I was just thinking back, as a parent, I would say to, what to say to my kids, when I was little, I had to walk a mile to school, that kind of thing, right? And then I paused and I realized, oh my gosh, this no longer really holds street cred because the kids can respond and be like, well, guess what? We've been through the pandemic. We didn't have schools to even walk to, right?
That's true.
So it's just so much mental health issues, as well as this lack of exposure because of social isolation, distance learning that, youth today just haven't really had those developmental experiences socially to go through these things. So how I've sort of implemented and tried to embed very concretely into helping people from both mental health and flexing their emotional intelligence muscles is to provide practical materials. So as you know, right, as a practitioner, a researcher, we can read all the books we want, right? We can go to talks and conferences, but at the end of the day, we're busy parents and professionals. And what do we actually do? What can we implement from a day to day, just weaving into what we're actually doing instead of putting yet another thing on top of our to-do list, right? That sort of mental load that we're carrying. So I've implemented these easy to use, immediately actionable card games. Mm-hmm. So very much using the spirit of play to allow parents and, as you said, adults as well to build and flex these skills into what they're already doing on an everyday basis.
I think you just got your new marketing idea there is like flexing and having kids do that. They have bigger muscles than me, so I think that'll be great. But I've noticed in my younger one compared to my older daughter that it is a little bit different because when the pandemic hit, they were at different developmental stages. The younger one being, kindergarten, first grade versus, being in third-ish grade for my older one. And the younger ones have a little bit more difficulty or challenge with initiating conversations, having that shared play, and My youngest, I thought, is not as sensitive as my oldest, but in terms of the lost opportunities there, to connect with peers, not over a screen, has been, very different for them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great observation. And, we've seen sort of the trend and the research, which is telling us that children, especially younger ones, right? Preschool, first grade, second grade, we see a regression in even their language skills.
Mhm.
Right. Even if they want to connect, it's hard to kind of express yourself fully to be able to make that connection. And then, let alone having that confidence to go up to someone and in the classrooms, Stephanie, I just, in talking with counselors and teachers, especially like I would say last year, they've been telling me that they've seen students kind of walking into the classroom with an emotional maturity of maybe 2 grades back than where they
Mm,
should be,
mhm.
right? And you see this manifesting in behavioral problems or kids just literally like standing up in the middle of a circle time or maybe like a teacher lecture and moving about, right? So
Right.
those type of just the practical social etiquette manners to like how do you deal with social dilemmas has
Mhm.
really taken a downturn.
Like the social skills, especially I think about the only children that don't have a sibling and they don't get that feedback back and forth. I mean, fortunately, we're a very tight knit family here, and my husband and I were fortunate to work remotely. So we were with the kids. I mean, I could hear um, my oldest because she had her desk right outside my room when I was sleeping. And I'm like, wow, this teacher's amazing because she was so enthusiastic. But I was just so um, excited just hearing her voice and how she was just trying to amp it up for the kids so they can feel her enthusiasm. And so I just my hats off to all the teachers that have survived teaching remotely, learning new technology and still making it fun, and they've gotten the academics as they've transferred back. You're a very well-adjusted human being, and I know you've been through quite a few challenges on your own. You shared with me that you were separated from your parents for 5 years and didn't see them, and then immigrated to the US with them. How were you able to navigate emotional intelligence and obviously the culture intersecting with that?
So it was between the ages of 5 before, elementary to about 10 years old. So I came to the US and to Texas when I was almost 10. And very much like you said, for the 5 years prior, I was living with my grandparents in a tier 2 city in China without ever seeing my parents. And you know how it is, like we didn't have FaceTime
Yeah,
or Zoom, right, during that time. So it was very much emotional intelligence and action. And it was really hard, not going to lie, right? So coming to the US, I didn't even know the alphabet. And so it's integrating culturally, but also with these parents that are supposedly my parents, right? But not
right.
quite knowing who they are or discovering that they're not quite the people that I remember to be. And so, it was definitely a sense of like a lost sense of self-expression and belonging when I came, ironically, right, to be
Yeah,
reunited with my parents because I was a pretty outgoing girl and going from that into almost just feeling like a mute, like I couldn't express myself. But on the flip side, right, it forced me to observe social cues, the nonverbal, right? So that's where I think it definitely helped me flex, right, the EQ muscles. But then, I do have to confess that this is not just isolated to that period, but I've found my struggle just throughout even now. And I say that because, now as a mom, my kids are kind of the age or have been the age where I was separated from my parents. And so witnessing how they are is like witnessing how I was during that time because now coming to the US, I literally don't have anyone who remember me or gets me in terms of who I was 10 years and before. Right.
right.
It's sort of that type of living history just vanished. And so coping with that and openly kind of accepting that that is part of my experience. That's what makes me who I am, but it's also, hardships experienced by my family, by everyone. I think that enables me to just practice a lot of different coping skills,
Yeah.
right? How I talk to myself. Am I the sort of victimized mentality going, hopeless, right? Or am I the hopeful, right, optimistic and wanting to make a better future? And, I just remember, I'll tell you the story, like when in China, they have Children's Day, right? And it's a big children's festival, a celebration of children. And, every day of that year, I feel very sad, right? Because I didn't have the parental love showered on me. But it was just, but it's fine, right? And dealing with that uncertainty of not knowing when I'll be reunited. And I just have a friend whose parents happens to be traveling out of town. And she was so despondent and so sad, right? And then I looked at her, I said, it's going to be okay. Just look at me. I'm fine. It will be okay. I guarantee you, right? And so I sort of somehow was able to just turn that into optimism for myself and for other people. And you know how it is, like practicing gratitude and helping others, kindness
Right.
really is also a great coping mechanism, and it just warms my heart.
Transitioning to our research on students of color in college settings or educational settings, I did a lot of research in graduate school, which was quite a few years ago, looking at help-seeking behaviors between white
Yep.
and Asian American students. And, of course, Asian American students were less likely to seek help despite having mental health difficulties. And sometimes it's a little discouraging to say, is it really changing? But what trends have you seen in your research and in your practical life in regards to Asian American help seeking?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely hit the nail on the head. I think there was a recent study in terms of this trend, right? The Healthy Mind study. It found that roughly about 80% of mental health cases go untreated in Asian students, Asian college students. I
That's
mean,
huge.
that's huge. And that's really the highest across the board for students of color. And, what I see in terms of the recent trend is that there is a decline, and this was a meta-analysis, so study of many studies that found that students in, Western universities today are less emotionally intelligent compared to those a decade ago.
Mhm.
And, other research have found that today's college students really reported the highest levels of stress and anxiety compared to any other generation than we've ever seen. And this was before the pandemic. So you can imagine, right? Due to the pandemic, and then also showing that students of color and first generation students are disproportionately impacted in
Absolutely.
terms of mental health. And the other trend I see is, the College Counseling Center has really been that place, right, to mitigate, to treat students, but it's over capacity. I mean, at
Yes.
capacity on average, it can only serve like 13.3% of student body. That's tiny, right, given the increase in mental health. And in my own research, what I've seen is that yes, there's less stigmatization in terms of mental health in Asian students. People are more willing to talk about it, right? There is more, perhaps, awareness of what I'm experiencing and talking about it. But on the flip side, there's less like set of skills and strategies to be able to deal with what you're experiencing. And during the pandemic, I see these students shouldering on not only this whole new ball of emotions they've never experienced, but also other people's emotion,
Sure.
right? And so there's a huge myth around how, if you're empathetic, you can experience emotion, that you're emotional intelligent, but that's absolutely wrong because it's also how you manage these emotions, how you regulate them, what you do with them, and with help seeking being one of a huge, right, a huge component of what you do with them versus, what I see as suppression a lot.
Yes.
And so what I've done is very much creating courses and interventions that not are not isolated to, hey, you have mental health illness, this is what you need to do, but rather to everyone, to the general population, in terms of educating them on, how do you need help, and how do you go about and seeking help, and how can you use your peers to really talk out loud and create the support network to do something about it. So sort of what I do in terms of my cards and the course that I offer is bridging that gap in terms of beliefs, your beliefs about your emotions, right? What you're feeling and whether you actually need help or not. And then boosting up your skills. These are, I tell my students, these are real, essential adulting skills.
Yes.
Right. They're not just a mental health skill, they're adulting skills. Everybody need them. Right. So kind of fill up their toolbox and understanding what to do in different situations. And then also just what can you do to seek help? And I think in terms of Asian American students, these types of support and help need to be really culturally responsive.
Yes.
Right. Meaning that what's in it for me, how does it matter in my unique context? And I think that's a huge component of what we can do.
I think we are making progress in terms of looking at intersectionality, or the ways that our social positions in various marginalized groups really do impact the way that mental health is, presenting for certain folks. And so I guess I'm wondering, in addition to your cards, how do you think that we as educators, clinicians, and community members can really continue to create these safe spaces for those that are facing not only like general mental health stress, but also we have this extra layer of minority stress. We have the AAPI hate, which is deeply rooted in sociocultural history. And so, what are some low hanging fruit that we can actually pull to continue this process?
Yeah, this is definitely a heavy, right,
Yes.
question, lots of meat. And I think one of the easiest low-hanging fruit is very much representation and role modeling, right? And this is why, Stephanie, I love what you're doing, because
Yeah.
you are showcasing real lived experiences of people who look like us, right? And their struggles, not necessarily their success, because we see a lot of that. And one of the biggest barrier I see in students that's preventing them in terms of developing their mental health and reaching out is this imposter syndrome. Because when you witness so many success, right, from so many different people, it becomes lumped into this one gigantic success person that you feel like you can never measure up. And so this negative self-talk began to be like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get there? Right. So what you're doing in terms of highlighting the struggles and that process, right, of overcoming struggles and barrier and emphasizing that it is very much a journey is so incredibly important. And, I also have to say that the most effective approach is very much embedding it into what students or just young people are doing in general. So the more we can create bite-sized, easy to use, easy to, actionable, concrete things, the barrier to doing them is lowered. So yeah, those are some of the stuff that come to mind.
Well, thank you for your kind words. And I definitely need to hear it once in a while, because it is very challenging to continue to create content and on top of everything else that you and I are doing, right? And I think it's very powerful that two Asian American female doctors are side by side today. And I say that to many of my guests, like, it's powerful just that our faces are on screen and we're talking about some very important things. And ideally, the show will continue to grow, and more so to help the community, because students need to see this. Like you said, kids are at an age where they're dealing with cyberbullying. I can't even imagine growing up in the age with, now it's not even Meta, it's, Instagram, TikTok, all these 10-second, like, attention grabbing kinds of things. And so it is really important to acknowledge the struggles that our youth are facing. And so, talking about college students, they then segue into the workforce, or those that are not going to college, they may have already segued into the workforce. You have worked as a consultant in various places, and so what are some trends that you have seen? You mentioned imposter syndrome. Does that continue into these settings, and how have you kind of coached people to address those things?
Yeah, it very much continues the imposter syndrome to answer your question.
Yeah.
And just to take a step back, I guess it's kind of interesting, right? So we both sort of worked across the lifespans, right? So there's, K-12 youth, and then we talked about college students. I
Hmm.
teach emotional intelligence at a University of California campus. And then, but I really started as an adult development as a human capital consultant. I was very much in the Silicon Valley,
Yes.
working with Fortune 500 companies, healthcare, life sciences. And so, you know, one thing is, we tend to look at these in silos, but there really is a continuation of these struggles, these
Absolutely.
mindsets, right? Belief systems. And so I think that it's best to kind of understand their journey and trajectory as a whole, sort of this life system, instead of like you're a student label and then you're a worker. And so some of the trends I see very much continues from the college pathway, and that there's a lot of anxiety,
Yes.
anxiety socially. I think, the pandemic has forced us to work from home or study from home. And so people are more to themselves, and it's hard to
Isolated.
connect. Exactly. It's hard to connect, and you're just more comfortable being by yourself. Not that it's a bad thing, but it kind of is also, if you don't practice those skills of conversations and gaining other people's diverse perspective, that could be an issue, right? And then
Mhm.
there's also nowadays, given the economic downturn, what's happening, there's anxiety around job stability, and also continuation of job burnout, because now work-life balance is very much non-existent. It's integrated, it's blended. And so to set that healthy boundary, right, is very, very difficult. And I was just on a call for, I'm going to be keynoting for a bunch of employee engagement, wellness companies for this event, and it's the theme is around re-engage, right? How
Mhm.
do we actually re-engage folks who have gone through such stressful periods during the pandemic, and now the anxiety and, of course, the quiet quitting
Yes.
trend that we saw, right? How do we keep everybody engaged, and how do we meet them on where they are in terms of their struggles, not only at work but also in their, in their very much personal lives?
Every problem in life can be boiled down to a relationship problem. How's your sex life? How's your relationships at work, with your parents, friends? This episode is sponsored by the Truism Centered Life's 30-day relationship challenge. Check it out at truismcenteredlife.com. Rob's 30-day relationship challenge is designed to help you feel more connected to those around you. It's a 30-day journey of self-discovery using resilience training and relationship psychology to help you feel stronger and happier with the relationships in your life. So, what do you think leaders can do, colleagues can do to be supportive to each other as they re-engage?
Yeah, I think the first one is really to uncover your own blind spots and your own cognitive biases. And what I mean by that is we tend to have and hold these assumptions about other people, maybe because of their skin color, their gender, or their backgrounds, right? And we also tend to think how we see things through our lens are how other people see it. And so one of the biggest thing I work with companies is to understand what are these biases that we hold, not only from diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging perspective, but just in general and how we think and interpret things. And also from a very concrete standpoint, I work with companies like Google to, leadership teams to kind of work with their teams to open up the communication around some of the misunderstandings and elephants that are already in the room, but just kind of buried, right? And one way is to understand your personal tendencies. So one example is, a simple question like, when I'm feeling stressed, I appear to be, or I could be misunderstood as, right? And you can see some people, maybe when I'm super stressed, I become the drill surgeon. I am the task manager, especially of my family, right? This is when my husband's like, you better watch out, right?
Step back, everyone take cover.
Yeah, beware, right? And then of course, like I've got these like signals. When I have lots of boba of different flavor in my fridge, that's a sign of stress. I need my boba and like continual feed of like sugar. So this is where like very concretely people can really get to know each other, right? Do you tend to, be the drill surgeon, or are you someone who literally shuts down, right? Becoming paralyzed. And so to uncover those misunderstandings definitely helps to open up the conversation. And then, just an inclusive participation and decision making of your team. Ask for feedback. It doesn't cost you anything to ask, right? How are you doing? How do you feel about this? What's your thought on this, right? And this would encourage the naysayers and other people with different opinions, and it would actually benefit your team to being more creative, right, and more diverse in your approaches to problem solving.
Yeah, it reminds me of a leadership exercise that we did, that I did quite a few years ago, but it's still relevant today. And it brought up, it came to my mind when you were talking about it, is we had to write a letter, a how-to letter to handle myself or handle yourself. And, I recognize that it's like, don't approach me right before lunch because I'm hangry and I'm probably not going to have that emotional intelligence or empathy to really put forth at that very moment. And also, don't call me at 5 a.m., 6, 7, because you're not going to hear from me unless, it's an emergency, right? And the other part is I had to really reflect and learn that I had very high expectations, still do, for myself. It has gotten more flexible as I've aged, but that would really be projected onto people around me, my colleagues, my team, those that I manage, my husband. And everyone has different styles, and you can't hold people to the same standards as you would yourself, because you have to look at their working style and what their goals are too. Not to say don't have team goals and aim for excellence, but it definitely is important to self-reflect and, like you said, have that mindset of really being curious and understand people around you and what they may be struggling with, because you may misinterpret someone having, a really dark look on their face, um, a gloomy look on their face, as you said something to them to make them upset. But really, it could be, wow, they're struggling at home or they
Yeah.
didn't have a good night's sleep. So I love that you said that. And the other thing is for leaders to really, going back to what you said before about role modeling and really emphasizing self-care and that open door policy, to really say, hey, I do need a self-care day today. And it be okay, not like, hey, what's going on, with you, but respecting people when they're telling you they need time.
Yeah. And, so many great things you just said, right? One thing that I really pulled up is, none of us are perfect, right? This is where expectations of ourselves and others really come into play. And, on an ongoing basis, to just have a sanity check on that is really important. And role modeling that no one's perfect, right? Sometimes we are absolutely cognitively, emotionally, or whatnot tapped out
Oh yeah.
because of personal things. Yeah. Or at work, right? So that allows people to understand we're not perfect. We are not going to be emotionally intelligent at all times. It's just not humanly possible. And so to give people and ourselves the permission, right, to be yourself and do that, but also forewarn really others around us to understand how to work with us and to get cut us some slacks, right? And likewise us with other people, right? So this mutual understanding and role modeling and just that permission, that language, right? Having that language to be able to express what is it that we actually need is so important.
And you heard it from the EQ expert. You don't have to be perfect all the time. And I think that that's really important because we're sitting here and we're not doing it in an ivory tower. This really is a very fast-paced world. I imagine there's some overlap between you and me about maybe overcommitting or taking on too much. And sometimes I always tell people, they ask me, "Hey, how do you manage everything or balance?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm 20 seconds from losing my shit all the time." You know?
Exactly. Yep. You think I've got it together?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And it tends to lighten the mood, but in reality, it really is like recognizing that things are stressful for us, and it's just that maybe we've built up support systems around us that have really been able to help us. We seek our own therapy. I always say a good therapist has their own good therapist because we have to take care of ourselves too. I wanted to also circle back because you touched upon the generational intersection. And again, a lot of buzzwords come up, and people have been throwing around generational trauma. Now, it absolutely exists,
Mm.
but I'm wondering your perspective of how generational trauma really impacts emotional intelligence, within and between um, the various generations.
Yeah, such a great point, right? And very much in good and not so great ways, right?
Yeah.
It's really, there's this quote like it does matter what happens to you, right? But it matters even more in how you react to it. And in terms of generational trauma, I mean, from a very biological standpoint, it does carry down in terms of epigenetics and just how we might be more sensitive and tuned into certain stress that would trigger us, right? So understanding those things we tend to default or default actions and triggers and pet peeves, well, right off the bat is an easy way of dealing with it, reacting to it in healthy and productive ways. And, I think again, like this is why I do what I do and I really love what I do is to open up the conversation across generations. And, I joke around in the type of because my cards are skills building, right? So
Mhm.
I say these are the types of skills that will never go out of style. And they are meant to be used across generations to really bridge again those perspectives, those lens, and to also bridge the fault lines caused by certain trauma. I think when we ruminate, when we dwell on these things, we spiral down into this huge negativity. Whereas if we can share with it, openly talk about it to even baby step extents, it really kind of loosens the emotional baggage that we carry. And Stephanie, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had, especially with Asian American college students who come to my office hour and share with me the fact that they also had certain experience in terms of feeling like not mattering, neglected, or just not being heard and understood
Not
by
being
their
seen.
parents, not being seen. Absolutely, right? And this could have happened years and years ago, but I see the scars, right? It's
Yeah.
the wound is still so fresh. And this is where, again, help seeking is so important. Even if you just relate to another person who has shared a similar experience, will make a difference.
Absolutely. And so how does a college student or even a young adult approach this topic? Like they have your deck of cards, and I had the Parents Are Human CEO on like seasons ago, which facilitate conversations about emotions, very much inspired by his difficulty in talking with his parents. And I noticed that in our family, again, we're generations down. So we were using the cards to prompt discussion. And then when my kids took it over to their grandparents who immigrated from Vietnam, their grandpa and their grand uncle would answer the questions. But my mother in law would not touch it with a 10-foot pole because her response was, we went through this. I don't talk about emotions. I don't want to talk about it. So obviously there'll be different reactions, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but how can someone introduce it to get buy-in from your family to even embark on looking at these cards and having these conversations?
Yeah, it is very difficult because everybody has or could be differently receptive to
Hmm.
certain things, right? And there are also trauma that they're dealing with where they rather not open that wound again. But I'm telling you that I've also worked with, as a cognitive science researcher, worked with folks who are 70 plus around building memories, but also their growth mindset. And these things definitely surface.
Hmm.
You think they don't, but even in older stages, it really bubble up. And as far as convincing sort of that change management persuasion work, I think it's about having patience and again, checking your expectations. You can perk up somebody's interest by doing it not with them, but with someone else near them or side by side. So, the way, for example, my cards work is that the numbers and the suits of this playing card are actually coded. So, the hearts are actually working on your self awareness, or in other decks, building, nurturing your relationship, whereas it progressively gets harder and more difficult in terms of the diamonds and spades. And then the number on the cards are also organized by age, different focus areas and topics. So it's not about, just kind of blindly going about, but it's picking the right time and the right card to talk about it. And some of the decks that I have aren't necessarily conversations, but rather exercises. So, for example, those coping skills deck is really about, there's one card around savoring your experiences
Hmm.
or showing gratitude to someone. So it's not necessarily forcing an older generation to say, you must tell me what happened, right? But rather just simply saying a thank you, showing gratitude, showing that you are trying to understand them instead of asking for them to please understand what I'm feeling. And rightfully so, right? But we have to kind of move the needle based off of where the other person is. So we can go about with different approaches.
Yeah, my mom and I were actually just joking before this podcast. I was running, getting my tea and stuff. And I said, Mom, you really have to give yourself credit for the things that you're doing, which is help, in your semi-retirement, helping to pick up the kids. My husband loves those acts of service for people to show him love. And I'm like, you don't even know. He's so happy that you help him with that. And she's going to computer lab for adult education. And we're just like, I am so proud of you. And she's like, well, I just want to learn for myself now. And someone who was completely came from disadvantaged background, grew up in Chinatown, one shared bathroom to the floor, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and has really found this inner peace. But our family saying those things out loud can help people feel really loved and appreciated.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I remember this might be slightly off topic, but in the medical school, I took a course at Harvard, and it was the first day. There's a slide that the professor showed, and sort of, there's two periods where you will wear diapers or something like that, so anyhow, right, all of us, right, younger and older, right,
Yeah.
and so how we approach things is also very similar. So you mentioned reinforcement, positive reinforcement, right? So we can do that for our kids, for ourselves, but also we got to remember to do that for our parents, to
Hmm.
show appreciation and to show that they're going outside of their comfort zones at this older age, which is so much harder. right? Less malleable, and that they're doing what they're doing.
Definitely. Well, my mom learned how to ride a hoverboard from my oldest daughter, so she's a little bit of an anomaly, in
Amazing.
a good
Wow.
way.
Yes.
But so where can people find all your wonderful products, resources?
Yeah, thank you so much. So they can find these 8 series of award-winning decks either on mindbrainemotion.com or on Amazon Prime shipping available. And I also have actually free online coping assessment and just fun emotional intelligence quiz if everybody wants to know, like, where do I stand? What do I need to work on? So that's entirely free. And then I have the course that I teach at the UCs, which is available online as well. And feel free to follow me on LinkedIn or I guess Instagram at Mind Brain Parenting.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I really had so much fun on today's episode, and it's just great to connect to someone who there's so much overlap and you have so much enthusiasm. So thank you so much, and just looking forward to being friends and support each other.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for just everything that you do.
Your work is so amazing. Thank you for doing this because it really is important to, again, look at mental health across the lifespan, and you're really teaching the next generation on how to be great human beings. And I mentioned to someone the other day, I was like, all human beings have to make a choice as to whether they're going to be kind overall, but also in interactions. And so we all have, it's not all or nothing, but we all have that capacity to do either bad behavior, good behavior, or everything in between. So I think you're contributing to obviously the kind part of humanity. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. That means so much to me.
Thank you for tuning in. Remember to support us for free by subscribing to our mailing list at colorsuccesspodcast.com. There, you will find our socials, YouTube channel, and all episodes on streaming platforms for great additional content. As Rob Heaps from Partner Track said, success is contagious, so come catch it.